welcome. I am Karen Sims with the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative, and thank you for joining the See You Try show. Just a quick reminder, the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative is a local effort working to make Champaign County and other communities more trauma informed, and that means that we want them to be more loving and equitable and just, and so we are advocating for a more compassionate community. So, and I am super fortunate today because I normally have a lot of different guests on, but I decided now that we're nearing the end of the year, it would be helpful to, maybe remind people about who we are and what we're doing. And I am fortunate to have two great board members for Tribe. So Leanne Kelly and Elise Belknap, and they both have different, lots of other hats beyond that. So they will do some introductions of themselves, but I have them both with me. And we are going to talk a little bit about sort of who they are and introduce themselves, but also talk about hope and resilience and in this time. And Elise has done some really interesting things. And then we will end our conversation talking about heal. So welcome aboard. So we've kind of got an outline of what we're going to talk about, but anybody who's ever watched the show knows that we could take the scenic tour. And then when the three of us are together, we sort of, meander. So I am really happy. And I should do the last two other things. So Trauma and Resiliency Initiative, we're an effort of the Champaign County Community Coalition. We coordinate the community violence response work and receive generous funds from the Champaign County Mental Health Board. That being said, the views and opinions of our guests are their own. And they're not representative of any of our funders. And so have at it. So I guess always have to do the commercial, right? So that it sounds really cool and clear. But I will start off with letting you introduce yourselves and maybe share a little bit about why you got involved with the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative. I was reflecting on that earlier today. So, and I don't care who goes first, right? We can go alphabetical, or on my screen, Leanne comes first and then Elise. So however.
So age before beauty. How's that? There we go.
Then it would draw.
I'm Leanne Kelly. I'm 63. I am retired, not working for pay, working for Try. I have a social background in social work and a lot of volunteer experience in the Champaign schools as well as other school districts. We've lived in Champaign for 29 years.
Wow.
I met Karen through an organization I was working for called Cradle to Career Partnership. And Karen at that time was part of the Access Initiative. And we then met again as part of the coalition. Yeah. And I was serving on the trauma committee at the time, and just got really more and more convinced that trauma and resilience, because they go hand in hand. If you're traumatized and you don't learn and build resiliency skills, you're going to continue to act out your trauma in varieties of ways. So I just found that was my passion. And so when I chose to leave Cradle to Career, I've just been volunteering for Try since then, and have had 4 grandchildren in 4 years. So that's also been keeping me busy.
So and Leanne is definitely minimizing her contributions and her gifts to Try in the community. So, right, she's being very understated, but much appreciated.
So my name's Elise Belknap. I actually know Leanne outside of Try also. We met when I first moved to Champaign-Urbana about 7 years ago when we were looking for community. And so I'm also connected, I'll say, all of my hats, right? So I'm connected to Champaign County's early childhood education program, also known as Head Start. I'm their early childhood mental health consultant. And it is a program of the Regional Planning Commission, our county's Regional Planning Commission. So that's my full-time gig. I have a background as a counselor. I'm trained in counselor education and have also been trained as a school counselor. I have a background in restorative justice, restorative practice strategies, have a lot of interest in this type of work. And so for me, I met Karen and I was hooked. I got to see her do a presentation for the Champaign Police Department through somebody that I work with who knew I was interested in the topic, and he told me about this presentation. I was like, I'm coming. I have nothing to do with the police department, but I showed up and got to hear and learn and really consider Karen a mentor. And I've been lucky to be involved in this effort kind of along the way as it's grown, when I have capacity and time, because I'm also a mother of 2 young ones under the age of 7, and they keep me very, very busy.
So hopefully you guys can hear, like viewers out there, that I have 2 wonderful representatives of our board who are also really great representatives of our community. I forgot to say that if you have questions, if you're on Facebook and there have been things that you've been bubbling up and dying to ask us, this is the time. We have a board that is diverse and blended, and it's definitely a working board with Leanne and Elise are representatives, but know that everybody does the work, and TRI really does exist because people pull up their sleeves and give to us. And so we just, I am personally forever in everybody's debt, because I know I get a chance to be the public face of it, but I do a mere part of the work. And so I really am grateful. So both of you highlighted that and said like, hey, you were excited about the trauma piece, right? And I've been in 2 meetings today, and one of the things that in both of those meetings people have said they're struggling with is to like be in conversation with people and have them understand what we mean. And it seems like that people separate trauma informed care from equity and justice work. And I was just wondering if maybe like for a couple minutes we could just talk about, when you say the trauma informed care work or the trauma work, what do you mean by that? Just maybe to help better educate audience, but also clarity of terms, because there's so much alphabet soup out there.
Sure. Yeah, so I think when I first started this work, my understanding of trauma was like, a seed. It hadn't really grown yet, and it was pretty basic. And as I have learned from Karen and have learned from other sources that I trust, I've developed an understanding of trauma as as on a continuum of stress, as opposed to something totally separate. And that trauma is an experience in which our nervous systems become overwhelmed by an experience that's either chronic, like the pandemic that we're experiencing, or structural racism, or something acute, small, maybe not small, but like a one-time event, not small, but a one-time event that like floods the system, and you feel trapped and overwhelmed and unable to cope in the way that you normally find yourself coping day to day. And I've grown to understand trauma as not a mental illness, like PTSD, not as a mental illness, but as like a human experience that is that we all encounter in our lives, whether we know it or not, I think, because it happens in the body, and we as a culture, I would say, are pretty disconnected from our body and from kind of owning that kind of stuff that's happening in our lives,
Right.
in the hopes of kind of putting up a good face, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that definition.
So I think I started out thinking that trauma was really kind of those one kind of lifetime events that, potentially radically change how you are. Um, I'm the product of Depression era parents.
Mm.
My mother was in extreme poverty, and her parents actually left her 3 different occasions in an empty apartment because they couldn't pay the rent. So not only did she have this chronic poverty, but she was terrified of being alone, and abandonment. And my father had a string of significant deaths in his life, from young adulthood, culminating in the loss of his first child and his wife. And so, not my mother, that was before they met. But so I thought in terms of those events. And yet, when I first came, I already knew about adverse childhood experiences, but the whole systemic piece
Mm.
of those social conditions that we as organizations and communities and state and federal governments have put in place. That's where I really started understanding the connection between trauma and structural racism,
Mm.
and our
Mhm.
contribution as our unconscious contribution, I should say, I guess, as white people who were voting and participating and in local circumstances are the ones making those decisions.
Yeah. So, right, Leanne, first of all, thank you for sharing, right? Like, and being so transparent. But I think you're highlighting, one of the things that we talk about, like stress. Elise was talking about that stress continuum happens to us all. But then when you add more structural inequities or fewer resources or less power or agency, or maybe just neuro and structural differences, that sort of unbalances the scale. And so some people can have an adversity happen, but when they have a whole bunch of resources, both structural or cultural, or how people respond to them, it
Right.
lands one way. And then when you don't have those same level of resources, those adversities are much more impactful.
Mm-hmm.
And so always be thinking. I think that's why I always lend and talk about the community piece and not just the self-care piece. And at least I want to talk about some of the work that you're doing, because I know I tend to like shy away sometimes from talking about the trauma specific strategies, because I think sometimes it lets the structures off the hook. And Elise, you said something really powerful at our board meeting today, and I definitely, on Wednesday, and I definitely want to circle back to it. That really changed my view of that conceptualization. That actually was really like very freeing, and allowed me to think more whole. But so sorry, I went down a rabbit hole. But before I get to that, can we also talk about, so we talked about what is trauma. What about trauma-informed care? Because again, that's another buzzword, and is trying to build trauma-informed communities. And it might be nice, right? Like, I think I put out into the universe what my vision of a trauma-informed community is, or what does it mean to be trauma-informed. But it might be nice, right, to hear more nuanced versions of that.
Sure. So I think about, at a really basic level, trauma-informed care is where you treat people like people. And you are also, the more I learn about the nervous system, the more I'm you're also thinking about the world and the people that you're interacting with from the perspective of that. Like, we're all human bodies looking for safety and threat. And so do our systems, do our structures, do our services, are they shaped in ways that they allow human nervous systems to experience safety? or are they shaped in ways that create an experience of threat and danger? In which case, that is not trauma informed, being kind of a fundamental piece. And so in some ways that can be really subjective, right? As individuals, we might have different ways that we read a room, read a relationship, read an experience because of our history, our parents' history, as you described, right? The historical history, our privilege, our the adversity we faced. But there are some really fundamental ways we can prioritize safety. And I don't just mean physical safety. Emotional safety is, and a sense of how we think about safety plays into this, because our emotions are physical. Like they have energy, they impact our physical health. The science behind that is really clear.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm just thinking about like individual experiences that everybody has, right? And when I think about it, I think in terms of a lot of the different organizations that I have been part of. So volunteering at a school and interacting with those staff and how I felt treated by the staff, right? Mm-hmm. Or volunteering at Daily Bread or Austin's Place or Books for Prisoners. There's all these different organizations, or going to city council, speaking before the school board, going to a congressional representative's office. Mm-hmm. All of those places and spaces have the option of what Elise was just talking about. They have an option of being able to look at the person in front of them and treat them the way they want to be treated, right? Mm-hmm. That basic thing of saying, you're safe here, or you're welcome, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Those though are ways of operating that are either encouraged or discouraged by the institution that you're representing. So that's the way I look at it, is what is the institution, whether it's a small little organization like TRI, right, or a really big organization like the state government, going to the motor vehicles office, right? What does that institution have in place that either encourages or discourages people feeling human, people feeling that they are valued just for being there? And that is actually the beginning of whether or not you're going to have a good interaction or a negative interaction. Mm-hmm. So when it's then related to, we think of the systemic oppression of the last 400 years for people of color, someone's walking in the door feeling uncomfortable and not necessarily feeling safe because of their past experiences. And the person that they're coming, interacting with, representing the organization, can reinforce that negative, or maybe hopefully give them another alternative and start building bridges of positivity. I don't know.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I know you guys we could probably play off of each other. So Elise's definition of trauma informed is really closer to like Sams's definition, right? So you guys have all sat through. So it's the realizing what trauma is, recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma, changing how we respond to trauma, and avoiding re-traumatizing. And that is sort of like basically, right, like sort of this, in some ways, foundational, like as people who've been doing trauma informed work, like that is like the foundational work. And Leanne is sort of highlighting where Roger Fallett and Maxine Harris, the people who started the work around trauma informed care, think about it. And so Maxine Harris and Roger Fallett believed like it's a series of policies, procedures, and practices that can do the individual stuff, but also make sure that you change the whole landscape of the structure, right? And so, because they realize that all too frequently, almost all the policies, procedures, and practices that existed in helping systems actually were harmful,
Mhm.
and that the people doing the work were also hurt and also a part of that system. So, so that's why they came up with the let's assess for physical and emotional safety, and let's make sure that everything that you do is transparency and promotes trustworthiness. Let's make sure that the people most impacted by the issue have voice and choice and power, which means that in a service array, there's like 13 different flavors, not two. It means that we work collaboratively and that we have empowerment. And then I always throw in restorative, because I don't think that you could have discipline that is punitive without having restorative practices. But as you can imagine, like even in our conversation, it's this continuum of like understanding that sometimes like leads to disconnect. I think sometimes because people are like, okay, so I've got a program and I'm realizing that trauma happens, right? And we're maybe even doing some response that's different. And Sandra Bloom, who's one of the leaders in trauma-informed organizational practices, says, if we just realize, recognize, and respond differently, but don't do the sort of macro level change, she says, we actually make it crazy. So if I tell people like, hey, I'm trauma informed and I'm really sensitive to your trauma, and where I locate things, the amount of protective factors, what I ask you about, what I assess for, what I offer you is deficit based on like limited, right? Like if it doesn't change, if it's not about like giving you agency, voice, and choice, I'm actually crazy making you, because I think we put so much of the ownership on individuals and not on the people who make decisions. And so I just wanted to plug that. And I'm really happy we have this conversation, because I hope people can understand like the equity value when
Yeah.
you think about voice and choice means city council would look different. We ask for representation on a board, because I can tell you I'm sensitive, but if your board is not like representative of the community that you're supportive, right, like it just doesn't feel safe. It doesn't, it's why we do cultural competency and think about culturally responsive literature, whatever. You really think about like everything that you do about not causing it harm, but then you change your practices.
Yeah. So I love that sort of expansion that you're asking us to do, Karen, and it makes me think about this idea of like this sort of the individualism versus the collective that we kind of fall into the trap of as Americans so often. And this idea, it reminds me of like this parallel of like racism is about it's about being rude, right? And so if you're kind, then you can't be racist. And that's not actually what racism is. And that's not actually, doesn't actually mean you're not racist, or you're not engaging in racist practices, or you're not supporting the status quo that perpetrates structural racism on groups of people. And so same with trauma informed care. It's not just about being nice to a person.
Right.
It's also about these layers of like policies and structures and community within those. And I think there's this piece that is about like all of these policies can be written appropriately, but if I haven't dealt with my own stuff, I'm bringing it into that space. And now I, as a person, as a bureaucrat, as a politician, as a teacher, as a counselor, I'm bringing, if I haven't done the work to be aware of my own triggers, to notice myself when I'm being activated, then I'm just like spreading that around. And I think that's what we all do all the time. And we also have great capacity for connection and healing and love and all of those things as well. And we do all of those things. So there's sort of this piece of like these structures are also people enforcing those structures. And so there's that connection between the individual and the collective that have to be considered.
Yeah, so, and I'm going to let Leanne speak up, but it is what you're hinting at that I think at the board meeting that you said, because again, I think for a lot of folks of color who are doing trauma work, the focus on the calming structures, or even like things like, again, I don't want to be psychobabbly, but like even things like the polyvagal theory, which I really believe in and do, puts too much of the ownership on the individual and doesn't necessarily transfer the ownership back to the person. And so like when I'm talking to teachers like who want to teach like calming strategies to kids without working on their stuff, I'm like, no, the work is on your implicit bias. Like implicit bias is one of those things that can really activate. Like if I don't believe a kid can, they can't, right? Like you, right? Like that is it, you know, so you could be nice and kind and put them in a trauma specific intervention, and you can have a calming zone in the back. And actually, if you believe that they need it, then they're going to need it, rather than right believing in kids and folks' inherent capacity. And what you said at the board meeting, which I thought was like, hey, in some ways there is a bit of it, you see it as a pathway towards creating the capacity for people to be those agents of change, to be receptive to their own self-awareness. It is the gateway. And that was like very freeing. And I was just like, I just want to tell people like that over and over again. Yes, I want you to do as much of your own self-care, but it's as a means of helping you be in the grocery store, seeing the cashier as yourself, being challenging your own implicit biases around a whole bunch of things, being receptive to equity, being able to let go of power, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I mean, I could get on that soapbox now if you want me to, but or I can wait. But I do think that there is this, I think we've misunderstood what self-care really needs to be. And it's been about the Parks and Rec, treat yourself, like hilarious. And so we think about it like indulgence. We think about self-care as a distraction, as avoiding feelings, as only feeling good. And when we do that, we become more and more disconnected from ourselves.
Right.
Which then means we're disconnected from humanity at large.
Right.
And so I do really feel like if you are, if we can reframe self-care as being integral to community care, because we have these mirror neurons, right? Where like my nervous system is in your nervous system, there's feedback happening all the time. And so we create a sense of safety in relationship to each other, not separate from each other. And so that's the piece that I always try to work with the teachers that I support, is that it's not about the kid, right? And it's not that you're doing something wrong. It's about like, how do we help this relationship feel safe? And then what does that look like on like larger and larger scales? But if I can't sit with discomfort, if I can't sit with feelings of shame and guilt and let that move through me, I'm not going to be able to engage in dismantling structures that hurt other people that I benefit from.
So what you're saying is, back in the 70s, 80s, we called it the frozen chosen. that white people, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, but it becomes white America. So many of us, and I don't think this is too broad a generalization, don't know how to sit with that discomfort, because we have been taught that we are supposed to be on this road to success, and you do not admit there's any deficits there. You don't admit, that anything is less than, and you're striving for perfectionism. And so we then get caught in this bind. I mean, because most of my life, I was volunteering in a low-income neighborhood at age 15, doing tutoring through my church, right? But all this helping that I've done for over 50 years, the majority of it was based in the fact that I was being this good Christian who's helping the poor people, right? So I've already set up this negative dynamic, right? And I'm reinforcing that I'm the good person, and I'm reinforcing to them that they're the person in need, right? So it's all intertwined. And I was just thinking about how, because we can't, or we have difficulty, right, admitting that our uncomfortability, or working through our uncomfortability, we can't see that we're hurting. That the situation that has been created in this country hurts all of us. Right. And so we all then kind of keep reinforcing it because we think this is what's going to keep me strong, which is indulgence, will keep me strong because I'm letting loose on stress. But I was just thinking of it, teaching that I heard 2 weeks ago for the start of Advent about filling your lamp. And I wonder if we think about it in terms of self-care, filling the oil in the lamp is so that the lamp can light the way, right? So it has a purpose that's beyond us. The purpose is lighting the way for others and interacting in ways that bring light into a situation instead of more darkness.
So my brain is going, first of all, this is an amazing conversation, and my brain is going in about 13 different places, because I think that we know a lot about the impact of racism on Black people in terms of white people in terms of adaptive responses, right? We think, what does it cost you? But I also, so even in the language around self-care, when feelings for people of color, right, are traditionally demonized, there's not even accessibility. And so a lot of, again, people who are doing work with particularly African-American people who've experienced collective or generational trauma, the regulation of the nervous system doesn't even sometimes exist, because there's so much adaptation and so much suppression that any elevation, any experience of emotion is viewed as unprofessional, angry, aggressive, right? And so
it feels unsafe, maybe.
Not only unsafe, just not acceptable, right? If you think about how many projections and myths about angry Black women or aggressive Black men. And so people then, if you have, if you think about elephant training, if you raise your kids not to want to fight because we want to keep them survives, that connection to your nervous system is even more disconnected, because so much of the opioids are depressed, dopamine is depressed. You're just sort of coasting by just to sort of make it through, because culturally there isn't, oppression means that there isn't space, because when you do that, people socialize it out. So because I was actually thinking about at a meeting about a kiddo, and we were talking, and somebody recommended anger management. And I was like, well, if you think about the kiddo's life, they should be angry, right? That would be the logical response.
Yeah.
So why are we
trying to switch it?
That, right? That them being mad about bad things happening is somehow maladaptive. But how often, if you have enough of that, how often then do you get socialized to believe, if I want to be successful, if I want to move into the middle class, if I want my kid to be successful, how many of those sort of, as Leanne talked about them, those other cultural values do I need to adapt? And how much more disconnected does that make me from my body? Which is why I anticipate, and I'm not the only one, that's why there's so many disparities. One of the reasons why there's so many disparities in healthcare is that, people will lose a leg or a toe or whatever, not even know it because, again, that disconnection from body.
Mm.
And I'm gonna wait. Leanne dared bravely, and I know we need to shift, but I'm gonna tell you guys a story that probably will sound funny. So maybe, because I'm living and breathing this. So it must have clearly injured my finger a couple weeks ago. I don't know how I did it, but like pretty badly. And I told myself, like, my brain, and Samira will laugh at this, because I was like, I think I have a little arthritis. And so, I didn't even look at it.
You
Yeah.
like didn't
Didn't notice it. I
investigate?
was like, it's arthritis. Yeah. So and that's how I lived my life. Like, and as people of color, like, people don't take our pain seriously. So you just learn, like, not to, you internalize that. So I'm waiting for supervision with Samira, and we're sitting there. Samira's my program assistant. You guys don't see her. She's out on Facebook. So I'm waiting for Samira for a meeting, and she was a little late logging on. And I sit there and I look at my finger, and it is huge knot, bruised, swollen, like it is a hot mess. And I was like, oh, like there's something really bad happening here.
Oh,
And it was a week after I had injured it. Like, I had been literally like 7-10 days going, it's just arthritis, like, and you just have to keep moving it around. And so, I go to convenient care, and they're like, yeah, it's pretty bad. And we probably would have, maybe put it in we would have like maybe done something, but it's been like 2 weeks. And so just put it in a brace and, move it around or whatever. But my experience is not alone. I guess I want to say, like, I just know so many women of color who we don't even, right? Like, I don't even know what, and so I guess I want to say, like, even the self-care piece is a privilege piece that I feel like, how do we create more space for?
Right.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But now I was like, oh, I'm really injured. I should take that kind of more seriously.
Yeah, I definitely feel a little bit on a mission to try to like reframe how we think about self-care and to make it a lot more accessible, right? Because if we, like you said, there's this, that also means like changing structures outside of the individual.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about, do I have time in my day, right? Because there's privilege in that, right? Absolutely. But
Yeah.
right, and there's layers of, well, if I had right, if we were all getting a living wage, we would have a lot more time in our day.
Yeah.
Right. If we all had universal basic income, right, like there would be a chance for all of our nervous systems to be experiencing something different in our world. And like Karen said, my opinions are not representative of any of the people I represent, but there's so many different ways we could be thinking about structuring our society, so that it does create like a trauma informed experience for the individuals within and the groups of identities within.
If we had universal childcare.
Yeah, right. If we so we could probably all popcorn it. Like, we have trees and sidewalks and street lights and health and grocery stores and access and parity and caring neighbors who looked out for each other, right? Like and because I often think when we talk about community violence, right, like, until people feel safe, there will always be violence. And so we can focus on like the people engaged in the violence, or we can think about the environments that create stress, right? Right? Like, and so what would it be like to be in an environment that you woosad and were encouraged to go and play and walk and be out and about, because neighborhoods that are impacted by violence are ones where you're not woosahing, you're on guard all the time. And then we wonder why people pop off easily, because
you're in fight or flight, like
all the time,
all day.
On the edge.
Yeah, and you would have to be. It's it's just it's
survival.
It's survival.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, right, and when they come to Head Start, you're like, okay, I need you to be kid, not like on guard. And they're like, oh, no, I can't give this up because I still got to go home.
Right. It's not like code switching, like, oh, I'm just going to be like a kid who is not experiencing safety. Like our systems can get really habituated, right, and really sensitized to our environments, and then we bring that with us everywhere we go. And so I have a lot of conversations with teachers and parents who are like, their kids get out of a bad situation, they get their kids out of a bad situation, or the teachers have a sense of like, well, it's safe here, why can't they, right? Or like, well, that bad situation ended, why aren't they? And it's like, well, the body doesn't know it yet. Right, the body doesn't know it yet, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of experience, as opposed to just being told, hey, you're safe now, we're good, right? Like, you can trust me, right? Like, I have to show you, your mirror neurons have to accept my sense of safety in you, within it's like, it's so complicated.
Oh, no. And simple, right? It's complicated and simple, as Leanne was saying. And I'll let Leanne chime in, but as she was saying, like, you're at child support office. What is your experience there? Does it add to your feeling like, am I dreading it? How did I get there? Did I have to take 2 buses? Did I have to walk? Are people friendly? Again, not picking on child support, could be an absolute, right? Like, not okay, like, pick another office. You could be coming to try. And are we welcoming? Is it friendly? Do you feel safe emotionally? Do you see yourself reflective? Do I make you fill out a whole bunch of paperwork and that's not connected to you or your needs? Do you not feel like it's relational? Do I not see or care for you? Right? Like, all of those things just so make a difference. And so would you guys say, like, the short answer is, when we talk about wanting what we're hoping to do, we actually see it as a little, what's the word? Like, Leanne, we lost you.
I see her.
I see her talking. How did we lose her? Okay.
I think I'm back.
Yes, you are. Yay.
Good.
So what's the word that we would use, Leanne, to talk about when we really think about think about the world that we're all trying to create? What are we trying to create? Like, what's the short answer?
I would say Ubuntu, actually, but so Ubuntu is a South African or a Southern African word about the nature community that really is about coming alongside one another, right? And that is about treating one another the way we want to be treated, recognizing that a mom has just done 3 bus changes and is dropping off her kid somewhere, or is coming to, maybe a little stressed out, any of those things. Resilient. If we can create resilient communities, then what we're saying is we've put the pieces in place that people can love on one another, support one another, see the humanity in one another in all different spaces.
Yeah. And I want to do a plug. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to, and before Elise, I'm going to let you chime in, but I want to do a plug. So Elise has been so generous. Post-election, we were aware of just people feeling more adversity and stress. And Elise and Florence Kaplau from the Unitarians and several other people have been very, very generous at putting resources and videos and those kind of tips on our Facebook page. And Elise, you have created like groups and other opportunities. So like, if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I'm wanting to move further, or I want to work on my regulation, or I think like, like I'm called, like I see myself. I just want you to know that there are a whole bunch of resources, and we can also recommend books and stuff like that. But, if you're looking like, oh, over the next couple of weeks, what do I do? I think you could do your own like home study course, because Elise has just provided so many really excellent resources.
Yeah, thank you. It's felt like I'm just like a conduit a little bit. Like I just need to, like, I'm the one who has access to the computer, and something's coming through me around just making as much of the stuff available as possible. And it really started pre-election. My staff and I had created a weekly practice of a wellness strategy or activity to guide and support our staff in developing more tools in their toolbox. I just had this sense from myself, as well as all the people around me, that the coping strategies that we really depend on in our culture around avoidance, denial, distraction, are real short-term, gain, long-term consequence strategies, and that we're starting to be less effective, right? You can only binge watch so many shows before the dopamine doesn't exist anymore. And we're all in the middle of a pandemic, so what we normally have access to that would help us feel good and connected and calm and in community are also missing, or they're available but they don't feel as safe as they used to, so they don't provide the same type of relief that they did. So just wanting to create an opportunity for people to learn something that they hadn't ever tried before and get kind of like a taste. So it's not like they're making like a 6-month commitment to meditate every day for an hour, right? It's just like, here, which would be great, like if we all, I'm sure, but here's like, so we've done things like body mapping, where you sketch a little image of outline of a body on a piece of paper, and you kind of close your eyes and you bring your awareness to your body, and you start to notice the sensations that are happening in your body, right? Like moving past that disconnect that we can so often create just to survive in our world, and start noticing, where do I have warmth, and where do I have aches, and where do I have butterflies, and where do I have a porcupine, and where do I, whether where am I tight, right? Where am I tingly? Where am I, however you want to, whatever language makes sense to you, what color, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, however you want to do it. And to start kind of mapping that out on paper for yourself in that moment, right? Is like a way of helping to bring the story of your body into the front part of your brain to support integration. We did laughter yoga, right, to access like joy and playfulness and community. We've done gratefulness affirmations. We've done self-compassion meditations. We've done a lot of different things, some yoga, some polyvagal nerdy stuff. But we've created, those are sort of free and available. They happen, like, we'll do one topic, one kind of self-care practice a week, and we'll offer it several times that week, usually at 1:30. And then we'll either share the recording or we'll share the resource that we use, right? If it's not my individual, if I'm like playing a link or a video, we'll just share it at the end of the week. And there are 2 groups. There's a self-care community of practice Facebook group that anybody is welcome to join. And then there's a self-care for parents community of practice group also, that kind of orients around the fact that you're not, it's like you're not an island. You're in relationship to these like other beings in your home, and they're dependent on you, and there's like, it just makes self-care so much more complicated around like, how do I care for myself and my relationship with this child, and how do I help that child's well-being all kind of at the same time. And so trying to share resources around co-regulation and well-being for the whole unit.
Yes. So check them out. Go look for them. They are absolutely wonderful. And so for those folks who are, again, interested in more of that interpersonal work, like, know that resources are available.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be moving as a collective in the direction of like bridging that understanding of my interpersonal or intrapersonal work. How does that connect to my community at large? How does that play into the structures that I support? And can I expand my window of tolerance for discomfort so that way I can do hard things that are necessary to make this world a better place?
So can I share a metaphor I just learned?
Yes.
This week about sistering. I'm sure that's also brothering and those things, but the term sistering is actually a construction term. You know, when you have one of the beams that's helping to hold up a house, right? So could be in the corner. They're usually about every 6 feet. One of them, if one of those beams starts to, you know, maybe there was some wood rot because there was, you know, a hole in the roof. Maybe the termites got in, whenever. When one of those structures, the whole house is at risk of, you know, falling over. What they do is they put in a beam next to it. And the process that this is called sistering. I don't know how they came up with it, because it's a bunch of men probably who came up with this term in the 1800s. Who knows? But then if that's still not working or it's leaning too much, they put one on the other side. You know, and what I was thinking of is, as you were talking, Elise, self-care is in this group situation and putting out on Facebook, we're sistering. You're doing sistering by coming alongside to help this person be stronger, right? Mm-hmm. And it may even take both sides, but it's both. It's yeah, but the whole thing is not just self-care, because it's communal when you're, you know, and we're sharing. You know, as much as Elise is the guru, at the same time, we all have so much fun get together because we support one another. So to me, it's always very fluid.
Mm-hmm. You know, I know, which reminds me, we were going to talk about heels. So one of the images, so Elise has done a lot of work around like, if you think about an affect regulation toolbox, there are calming strategies and a lot of what she's talking about. And I tend to land more on the sensory supports, but not in the classical sense of that. I mean, I really think about all of my work about helping people feel more connected to each other, making sure that people understand wellness broad and deep so that they're engaged in things that feel good, not just personally, but like interpersonally, that we're advocating for more parks, more recreation, more play. We're advocating for, you know, a full plethora of things, that we're not being deficit based. And I think anytime we're, you know, kind of advocating for those changes, it changes the culture, right? So like when I'm thinking about what kids of color need, we don't need a lot more remediation. What we need is a lot more opportunity. So I like to think about that part of the brain. So I like tend to get more limbic brain oriented. And we also do a lot of thinking strategies, right? So like if you think about, like, again, the affect regulation toolbox, and I think that the research says they all go together and that they're all sort of hand and glove. And so if you're tempted, I'm just going to say this one more time, because we're not going to get a chance to talk about heels, so we'll have to get back together. But if what I would hope, and I think Elise and Leanne, you would echo, that we think about them all going together.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That we don't just think, oh, what I want to do is just good interventions around classical versions of self-care without thinking about the policies, procedures, and practices that allow for that on multiple different levels, right? Economically, environmentally, culturally, and to rebuild community, because we were going to talk about this as right. Like I think we've, but in this moment, I actually feel like people who don't have access to structural power, one of the things that has made it really difficult for them to engage in self-care is that we have a really fragmented sense of community. Like they don't, I mean, if you don't feel connected to your neighbors, if you don't have access to travel, if you don't have networks of support, and so it's that slowing down and body awareness is like helpful, but not really if again, if the environmental or the opportunities don't exist. And so I want to make sure that I think you guys would say like that we're always thinking about the both and, because I know so many people are always tempted to think about just the treatment or the intervention and not their work.
I got 2 minutes I can explain Try Heals.
Please. Okay.
So explaining to people what the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative about is not always easy, because we operate on so many different levels, from the individual to the institutional, citywide, or whatever level. So I came up with an acronym of HEALS. Very simply, it's hope, empowerment, advocacy, and leadership. That everybody needs hope. You aren't motivated to do something unless you have the hope that you will be able to do something. So Try comes alongside individuals, but also organizations and the larger institutions, saying you can do this. There is a better way of doing it. And that leads to empowerment that enables people, as I think Elise was saying earlier, to say, okay, I'm going to do this hard work because somebody's alongside me and saying it's worth it, right? And that you can step out and do more things. Advocacy is critical because lots of people don't feel safe in the environments where they have to advocate, have not experienced any positivity in them. So Try is an organization, and many of us within Try, volunteering for Try, whatever, see that as an important thing, that we can do this, because if nothing else, I'm an old white lady, so they got to listen to me because I have nothing to do. But and then the L is leadership, because we need leaders who understand what trauma-informed practice is and can go into places and spaces and influence other leaders to look at how to operate differently, how to operate in a way that's life-giving for all of us.
Oh, that was perfect. Wow. Right. Like you wrapped that up. So, right. Like that was great. So want to know what we do. And if you're doing healing work, you're doing equity work. So anybody who's committed to doing racial justice work, if you're not doing it in ways that are trauma informed, it probably won't be effective. So I love that. Do you guys have final work? Like, I feel like we should do this again. Maybe like this is like a regular thing, because people don't get a chance. I get a chance to be privileged with these wonderful women all the time, right? Like, and having these amazing conversations. So, but do you have parting words for our audience? Final thoughts?
I would just say that something that I read framed the pandemic as a portal, and I think that's really resonated for me. That it's like the birth canal. Like we're in the middle of it. We can't go back. We don't know what's ahead of us, but we have an opportunity in this sort of space where we can reevaluate what's working for us as individuals and as a society, and what is clearly not working for us as individuals and as a society. And we have an opportunity to stand up and be heard and advocate for a more just and equitable society. And that if it takes some self-care and some learning to expand your capacity do hard things and handle emotions in order to do it, I then do the work and find your partners in that who are invested in that growth as well.
I would say, as I represent our church in the Interfaith Alliance, which has really been a blessing to me to learn more about different faith traditions. And December is a month about light. In all varieties of traditions. Hanukkah started, I think this is the second night of Hanukkah. Diwali is a Hindu tradition. And one of my most favorite scripture verses, though, is the light has appeared and the darkness cannot overcome it. So, wherever we are in our own processing of our trauma and all that, there is light. We just want you to know you're not alone. And people are around who really want to do the sistering.
Yeah. So I know we have to wrap up, and I really appreciate you. You both have inspired me to issue a challenge. So find us on Facebook. I think focus on, as Leanne said, the hope and the light. Every time you see an article that talks about kids having or people having mental health needs or how bad it is, like, let's start to work on shifting our brains and to look for what's possible and positive, because it doesn't have to be this way. And so the way forward is by focusing on the light, and for us believing that we're the ones that we've been waiting for and that we can do something about it. So thank you so much. So again, share celebrations, all the places where you feel empowered and have agency to transform what we see. We look forward to celebrating with you and to focus on healing. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.